Right then. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Alexander, and yeah, today it's another book review. And I'll be reviewing Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. Yeah, this is one that I've wanted to talk about since I read it, and yeah, I'm glad to finally be able to be doing this. Um, I know Vladimir Nabokov from Lolita. I read it years ago. I don't remember how long, but it must have been about 8 years ago since I read the book now. And I remember not liking it at all at the time. I couldn't get into it. It was so difficult to read. I remember the language being so stressful, and it was just not accessible to me at the time. Perhaps I was too young, or I'm not sure what the problem was exactly, but I know that like even people that were older than me at the time, I remember them saying they had trouble with it as well. So it probably just probably doesn't only have to do with the fact that I was young. It's just not. I just remember it not being very accessible to read. So I was very skeptical going into this one as well, because obviously it's the same author, and considering I didn't like that one very much, I wasn't thinking I would like this one as well. This one is also even probably even more critically acclaimed than Lolita, but this one is more within like certain circles, more like I don't know, the high literary people who like I don't know, like people who like study literature in like university or something. But then Lolita was like critically acclaimed as well, and I didn't like it. So this one being like critically acclaimed, like you would see it on a lot of like top 10 or top 100 books to read before you die type lists. Um, but yeah, that didn't still make me feel like I was going to enjoy this, to be honest. So the fact that it was critically acclaimed didn't do much for me looking forward to it. Anyway, so about the plot, it's a bit of a crazy one. I remember thinking that the plot was wild. So it has four parts. It starts out with a forward, which you would expect a forward would be like a forward from, I don't know, who usually writes a forward? Is it the author or the publisher? I'm not sure who writes the forward. But in this book, the forward is part of the book. Um, then there's a poem, which is the second part of the book. Then there's a commentary about the poem, and there's an index, which is a very important part of the book as well. Even though I feel like, just like me, lots of people wouldn't like go through the trouble of reading the index. Um, but I do feel like the index is something that you should read if you want to get like the full experience from the book, because it's a major part of the book, just as important as the poem and the commentary and the forward before it. So, anyways, this review is going to be filled with spoilers. I do feel like most of my reviews have spoilers anyway, so, but yeah, just saying. Because I feel like this is one of those books that you probably want to go into it as blind as possible. Um, yeah. Anyways, so the book is about a poem written by a character called John Shade. Um, it's a really beautiful poem, and this poem is about the character's life, John Shade. Um, he talks about his family, his daughter, and at some parts he begins to talk about like some philosophical ideas, like the idea of death and the afterlife. I thought the poem was really beautiful. Anyways, John Shade dies before this poem gets published, and someone else gets their hand on this poem. This someone else is another character called John Kimbolt. No, not John Kimbolt. His name is it Charles Kimbolt or John Kimbolt? I don't know. I'll just call him Kimbolt because that's his last name. I don't quite remember his first name. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Anyways, this character who gets his hand on the poem after John Shade passes away, writes the foreword and the commentary of the poem. And then he publishes the poem along with his foreword and his commentary. And so technically, that's what we're reading. That's what the book is. So the foreword you read in the beginning of the book, is written by this character, Kim Boats. Then you read the poem by John Shade. Then you read the commentary about the poem by Kim Boats. And then you read the index. And that's the book, or that's the sort of like the layout about the book. And so right from the beginning, from while reading the foreword, you get the feeling that, you're you're probably not supposed to trust what this Kim Boat character is telling you. You get the feeling that he's a very unreliable like narrator. So he's doing all that's in his power to sort of like convince you that you cannot understand the poem without his commentary. So he's trying to tell you that the poem makes no sense without his commentary explaining it to you. But then you read the poem and you're like, the poem makes perfect sense and I understand everything that the poem is trying to talk about. And then you read his commentary and you see that his commentary is not about the poem at all. And instead, it's about like his obsession with the John Shade character who wrote the poem. And he goes off on this tangent about some country which is probably fictional, and the king of that country who is like an exiled king, and an assassination attempt on this exiled king. And then there's also a bit of a murder mystery in the commentary as well. So initially I'm like, well, what the hell is going on? What is happening here? What's this character talking about? He would, for example, take a line from the poem and then starts telling you what this line is supposed to be about. But then you quickly realize that he's not talking about the poem at all. Like, he doesn't even say anything about the poem. And then when you persevere with this ridiculousness that's going on, you realize that this commentary has a bit of a narrative to it as well. And the narrative starts to form and it gets a bit interesting. And that's the book really. That's what the book is about. The book is sort of like this puzzle that you're trying to solve. Um, you're like trying to figure out these questions about like what's real, what's not. Is Kimbo saying the truth? How did he acquire the manuscript? Can we trust that he hasn't doctored or changed anything about the manuscript? The whole thing we're reading might just be a result of this Kimbo's character being delusional. Like, can we trust anything he's saying? And one of the interesting things I found about this book is how he managed to get me to care about trying to piece this together, because I know it's fiction, and because of that, I know for sure that there's nothing about this book that is true. That not that it's true, but there's nothing about this book there's nothing about this book that is true. The only thing that I can know for sure that is true is that Vladimir Nabokov wrote all this. But the character of John Shade, the character of Kimbo, and all that stuff, like, they're all fictional. So what do I care if Kimbo doctored the manuscript or whatever? Like, there is nothing to piece together if it's all fiction anyway. So in the end, so it's like whatever decision you make is probably the right, whatever call you make in the end. If you think Kimbo's doctorate is delusional and just talking about, is just saying rubbish throughout the whole commentary, you're probably right, because there's no like definitive answer. Nabokov didn't give any definitive answer as to whether like Kimbo is delusional or if it's real. Um, but yeah, like, I thought the book was really interesting. The writing, though, I thought was like a bit difficult to read, and I guess what I mean is that I didn't find it very accessible. I'd often find myself having to read paragraphs again and again before I could move on, because it was hard to get into like any sort of like flow. So it's sort of a book that I think that if you want to read, I mean, if you're at this point, you've probably read it anyways because of all the spoilers I'm talking about. But it's one that I found that I had to be like very patient with and not rush, which was hard to do because like I needed to finish it before we had like a book club meeting, so I had to like read it a bit faster than I would have loved to. Um, but yeah, I guess that's what you get sometimes when you're reading literary fiction is like you just have to be very patient with it to be able to like see its payoff. And this book does pay off a bit. Well, not more than a bit. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. Um, I think the main theme of the book is this is it's sort of like a criticism on the idea of like criticism and how we tend to take the words of critics as kosher, if you will. So like a critic might critique something like a movie or a book or a piece of music, and if this critic is someone that we trust, we would probably like believe him and somehow place his critique of that work on the same level as the work in itself, which some people tend to do, especially like I said, if it's critics that they trust. But like this book is trying to show that sometimes someone who's critiquing a thing, it probably reflects more or probably tells you more about the critic than the work they're trying to critique. So it's like if someone's critiquing something, it might not be like a fair reflection of what they're trying to like critique. Just like in this Kimbold character, for example, on his commentary about the John Shade poem. Um, but yeah, all in all, like I feel like if you're looking for a bit challenging, something a bit challenging to read, or not like if you're looking for that. I mean, you could be looking for something that's challenging to read, but if you're not looking for something that's challenging to read and you don't mind something that's challenging to read, this book might be it for you if you don't mind investing the time into like the difficult prose. I would also recommend that you take the time to read the index because the index is sort of like a clever way of helping you piece together what's happening. So the index refers you to points in the book where you can read and quite and figure out all that's going on. There are like lots of like videos on YouTube as well, really explaining the book. And in that way, the book is really cool because it's like it's one of those things books where like I feel like if you read it with a group of friends, you guys can have like a really cool conversation afterwards, trying to like figure out and piece together what's happening. I've heard people call it meta fiction. I don't know if that's a thing, and I suppose that there are like other books in this like subgenre of fiction, and this is probably like one of the pioneers of like that kind of fiction. Um, but yeah, you might. There's also what mentioning that you might find yourself spending more time on it than you would expect because it's not that big. The book is actually short, but because of how like I feel like because of the writing, Vladimir Nabokov's writing style, you probably might find yourself spending more time on it than you'd expect to. But yeah, it's one that I appreciate for how clever it is, much more than I would say my enjoyment of it. Because don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it a lot, but I think a lot of my enjoyment comes more from me thinking of, this is clever, as opposed to me in the moment, like really enjoying what I was reading, and not that I didn't enjoy it. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does, because yeah, it's a good book and I did enjoy it, but I guess what I'm just trying to say is that it's a bit challenging to read. And not that that's a bad thing, but if you're looking for something just to have like just to enjoy reading, then this might not be it. But anyways, I feel like I'm just going in circles now, repeating myself over and over again. I really like the book a lot, even though I've said that like I didn't like it that well, but I did like it, and I would recommend it to people. who are looking for challenging stuff to read. Anyways, I'll go away now. I'll catch you in the next one, which is what's the next review supposed to be? The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. Yeah, that's the next book I should be doing a review about because I just read it recently and yeah, why not talk about it? Anyways, I'll go away now. Catch you in the next one. Bye.